Hello, NATR 346. This is a mini talk on a concept called soil moisture storage. It is part of the overall module for a more detailed look at estimating and designing water use for different landscapes. So there'll be another talk introducing that method for how to select plants and estimate water use for different landscapes. It's really kind of an important and powerful tool that we'll be learning how to use. It's more simple than you might think. And anyway, I hope you find that part interesting. But this is sort of a standalone concept that I want to get across. I think we've talked about it in very general terms before. But here in this diagram, it tells the whole story, really. And that is, like we've covered groundwater banking before. So here's groundwater down here. And the concept of groundwater banking is that, during a drought, you can pump out the groundwater and maybe this water table will drop. But then during wet years, you can allow the groundwater to recharge and sort of use it as a bank account. Use the groundwater as a bank account for use in dry years. This soil moisture storage term is similar to that in a way. So the idea here is that, when rainfall or irrigation water infiltrates through the soil surface, it percolates into the soil and it is stored in this critical root zone. The reason this zone is called out and is important is because the water that infiltrates through the land surface and gets into the soil, it might not make it all the way to groundwater recharge, right? So it might come into the root zone and then get pulled out by the plants and transpire away back into the atmosphere. So when you're worried about, gee, how much rainfall is recharging groundwater, you have to consider, did the water make it through the root zone? Once it gets through the root zone, once the rainfall makes it through here and it's down here where my hand is, it's on its way. Gravity will gently pull it down and it'll get to groundwater. But if it's in this zone, it might get sucked out of the ground and back into the atmosphere. So from a groundwater budget point of view, that's important to understand. In fact, it's not only important that we get a certain amount of rainfall every year, but the timing of the rainfall is really important. And you'll hear people talk about the antecedent moisture content. Because if it's been dry a long time and the plants have sucked out all the water out of the root zone, then it rains. That rainfall will come in, infiltrate, and it will, just like groundwater, it'll recharge the root zone and hang out there. And if it then stops raining and it becomes warm and dry again, that rainwater that we got, hooray, will then just get pulled out by the plants and we'll never see it. It'll never recharge groundwater. And so there's talk about, we have overgrowth in the forest. That's recognized as a fire hazard. It's also a water hazard because the rainfall that is occurring in our recharge areas, in our mountains, and our forests, a lot of that rainfall is getting taken up by this excess growth that it doesn't occur naturally. It's only there because of fire suppression. And it's estimated that if we managed our forests the way they were evolved naturally as fire forests, about fire pine forests, then we'd have a lot less vegetation, a lot less plant uptake of rainfall, and we could get about 30% more of the rain recharging groundwater as it did before we suppressed fires. But anyway, you can see that, hey, if we get 12 inches of rain, let's say, and it all comes at once, and it takes 4 inches to fill up the soil moisture storage, and then we get 8 inches coming all the way and shooting through the groundwater, that's great. If we got that same 12 inches in little spurts, get 4 inches, it fills up the soil moisture storage, it stops, it gets sucked back out. 3 times, we get 0 recharge to groundwater. So it really matters. Now for irrigation scheduling, it also matters because when you're deciding how much water you need to irrigate for your crop, you also need to consider, hey, is there already soil moisture storage? Do I need to irrigate? So this is the flip side. Like if you're designing a landscape system or a farm, and you want to minimize your water applications, if your soil moisture storage term is full, that is, the soil is wet, then even though there's evapotranspiration going on, you might not need to irrigate because you can rely on the soil moisture storage. And just like all units of water, precipitation is measured in inches. Believe it or not, the amount of water stored in the root zone is also measured in inches of water. And it turns out that a typical root zone, say this is an alfalfa plant, they have roots that are 4 or 5 feet deep. That's pretty deep. So a root zone maybe is 3 or 4 or 5 feet deep effectively. That can store about 8 to 10 inches of water. It's a lot of water in the root zone. And the way this plays out, and I hope this part, so that's the main concept I wanted you to get, is just, at the start of the year, this soil moisture term is usually pretty full. In January and February, after winter rains, this is full. So when the evapotranspiration demand starts in March, April, May, June, it starts to heat up and dry up, there's available soil moisture there for the plants to use. You might not need to irrigate. So, and here I wanted to get into it to another level and just show you how this plays out. Excuse me. In some simple and more complicated cases of a water budget. Now, again, don't get this confused with the irrigation and plant and landscape planning in the next talk. This is, again, staying on sort of the concept level, but I kind of want to finish this job of explaining water budgets. So I'll start with the simplest case for a dry climate and a wet climate and what it looks like. And this is stuff you've already done. So we just look in this class at annual demand. So let's say we're in Bakersfield or some dry place. It only rains 15 inches, but it's hot and dry, so the plants want 66 inches of water. So over a given year, you're going to need to apply 51 inches of water. That's like more than 4 feet of water on your grass or alfalfa plot to satisfy that demand. Okay, we know that. For a wet climate, the precipitation exceeds the evapotranspiration. That's really nice. Up in Northern California, my niece just moved to Kentucky, and they have a big sod lawn all around their house, and they have no sprinklers. There it rains a lot more than the evapotranspiration, and they enjoy a lush green Kentucky bluegrass lawn. I don't know how much they enjoy mowing it all the time, but at any rate, when you live in a place where it rains more than the evapotranspiration, your irrigation requirement is 0. This is the simplest case, the simplest way to look at it on an annual basis. But in reality, we don't do this on an annual basis. We have to schedule irrigation at least monthly. And if you really get into it, farmers are starting to get into the daily or weekly schedule. So that's a little bit different because notice that in the dry case, we said we needed 51 inches. If you noodle it out over the course each month, you'll end up needing more water because of the way it works out. In January, maybe you only need to apply 1 inch. You have 2 inches of ET, it rains 1, you need 1. You add all these up, if you do it every month, you'll get a different answer than the overall annual. And that's especially true in the wet climate. In the wet climate, again, if you looked at it very simply, you don't need to irrigate it, provide any water. But if you do it monthly, sure enough, there are some dry months where you're going to need to, if it rains 0 and you have 6 inches of potential evapotranspiration, on a monthly budget, you're going to need to apply 6 inches of water in June, in July, 5 in August, 4 in September. So these add up. So actually, if you're managing, let's say the turf out at the football field there, and it's July, and it doesn't rain, and you have 6 inches of transpiration demand, you're going to apply 6 inches of water. So if you're managing it monthly, all of a sudden you're applying 25 inches of water, whereas the simple case you didn't need any. And that's just because even though overall it rains more than it evapotranspires, there are dry months. Now with the soil moisture term, it gets a lot more interesting and complicated, but I think more interesting than complicated. And if you use the soil moisture term, then during those dry months, you might not need to apply water because of the soil moisture term. And here's how it works. We'll just walk through this for the dry climate. We're starting in January, and it rains a lot in November and December. And so we're going to start with that soil moisture term that, hold on a second, sorry. We're going to start with this soil moisture storage layer full of water, full of its 8 inches of water. So here in the dry climate in January, we have, it rained an inch. The ET demand is 2, so you need 1 inches of water. But you have 8 inches in the soil moisture storage in the root zone, kind of like the bank. And so you don't need to add any. But you used up an inch of that water, so you end up in January, at the end of January, with 7 inches in the soil moisture term. Then you carry that 7 inches over into February. In February, it's a little warmer. There's 2 inches of demand, 1 inch of rain. You need 2 inches. You've got 7. So your irrigation requirement is 0, but you lost a few inches, so now you're down to 5 inches of soil moisture. Carry that over, etc., until finally the soil moisture term is gone, and you need to be applying water to meet the demand. So your ending soil moisture in April is 0 because you needed 6 inches. There was only 2 in the soil moisture bank, so you ended up applying 4, and then you're out. And then, so during the dry months, you're applying all the water that is needed. And then until you get back into the winter time, when it rains more than the evapotranspiration, here we need 0. It rained 5, you need 2. You need to apply 0. You had 0 in the soil moisture bank, and those 3 inches of rain ends up going back into the bank until you get back up into full. So if you take advantage of the soil moisture term, notice that that 59 inches of total need ends up actually only being 51 inches. So we're back to where we were at the beginning, where you needed 51 inches in the dry case. On the monthly case, in the simple case, you'll end up applying 59 inches. But again, if you incorporate the soil moisture term, you're back to 51. I hope that makes sense. I'm going to include this chart onto the module, and you can check it out, or reach out to me if you're curious about this. This is pretty involved. When we have in-person classes, I usually have groups work through this table. It's kind of worthwhile exercise, I think, but I just, again, want you to be aware of the concept of the soil moisture term and how it can influence irrigation scheduling.